Talk about it, family. Hello. Yes, it is I, Stephanie Powell, and I am so glad to be back with you with my special guest, healing practitioner Sooyong Kim, who joined us last month. And Sooyong's going to join us every month between now and October to provide us with an exclusive sneak peek on each chapter of her upcoming book titled Immigrant Consciousness Healing for Beginners. Let me say that again. That's a mouthful, Sooyong. Immigrant Consciousness Healing for Beginners. And last month we discussed chapter 1. Chapter 1 is titled Our Inner Wisdom. And in that chapter, Sooyong enlightened us on how to tune in to our inner wisdom. And as you share with us during that discussion, Sooyong, we may know inner wisdom by different names. It might be higher power, it might be universal energy, it might be spirit, it might be God, or any numerous other names that we use for our inner power. And you were telling us the difference between inner wisdom and ego, and how to discern between the two, how to know when inner wisdom is talking to us and when ego is talking to us, and how we can determine which voice to follow so we can make better decisions and be intentional about creating a better version of ourselves each day. So if you haven't seen that episode, trust me, it is chock full of great information and tips. Again, check it out on the Talk About It Instagram page or the Talk About It YouTube channel, as well as on Sooyong's website, sooyongkim.com. Please check it out. And I have to say, Sooyong, I've listened back to that episode myself, and I've incorporated what you shared with us into my own life, and said, is this inner wisdom talking or is this ego? And sometimes it was inner wisdom, and I said, yep, let me follow that path. That is the path to the win-win for all parties involved. And then there have been other times when I had to admit, that's ego. I'm going to put that in the back seat. That ego will not be in the driver's seat of my life, and I'm going to take another course. So today, Sooyong, your fascinating topic. We're now moving on to chapter 2, in which the topic is ancestral healing. And just saying that gives me chills in just a really deeply profound and positive way. Ancestral healing. I've been so looking forward to discussing this with you, and I'm so glad to have this opportunity to connect with you again, Sooyong, and for you to be here with the Talk About It family. So welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a wonderful
so much
pleasure
here. And Sooyong, thank you for being so generous about sharing information from your upcoming book, Immigrant Consciousness Healing for Beginners. I don't know too many people who would share such gems of information before the actual release of their book, but you're doing that. You're sharing that so that you can help people as soon as possible and provide them with a framework for what you will be discussing in the 8 chapters of those books. But again, it just speaks to the healer in you. You are here, you're so committed to helping others take steps toward becoming a better version of themselves each day. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing your information with us. So everybody, are you ready? Are you ready? I want to start, you know how I start, Sooyong. I want to start with the fundamentals, with the basics on ancestral healing. And I'd love for you to first define for us define ancestors. I know for me, when I hear the word, I might think of someone in my lineage from hundreds of years ago, my great grandmother or great grandfather. Is it that, or is it someone who could be in our family line from just a generation ago? How do you define ancestors?
Ancestors can be anyone who has passed over. So, for instance, my dad passed over when I was 13 years old, and he's definitely an ancestor who is in my life. And it could be anybody from, as you say, hundreds of years ago, or somebody that you knew, like maybe a grandfather, great-grandfather, great-grandmother that you knew before they passed away. So you
So
have a better
is that,
connection with them.
I'm sorry. So I hear the key words I heard in that is not just someone to whom you're related, but someone you knew.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And you would have a better connection with people that you knew. For instance, let's say you had a connection with your grandmother and then she passed away. Then she would be your ancestor and she would be helping you in this life.
Mhm. I do feel that from my grandmothers, definitely. And I'd love to share more as we get into our discussion. So thank you for the definition. So that's ancestors. Now, for today's topic, if we can define ancestral healing, what is that exactly? And why is that something we should consider on our healing journey? And I feel that our healing journey is continuous. You know, it's never really fully done in our lifetime. It's continuous. I believe. Do you
While
share?
we're here anyway, while we're here on the earth plane, it's
We're never going to get it 100% perfect. We're never going to get it done. The journey is ongoing. What is ancestral healing, and why should we consider that as something that we should take into account on our healing journey?
well, whatever information you have, the more information you have, the more resources and tools that you can have for your healing journey. And the more information you can find out about the experiences that your ancestors had, the more you can examine those to see if maybe you inherited some of those tendencies. Because now they're saying that we are inheriting ancestors' trauma. There's a lot of research now that people are doing in that field.
You know, it's interesting. I had one of my family members, someone a generation behind me, ask me a question, and I won't get too personal with it, but I thought the question was interesting. She asked me, she said, and it's someone whose mother I knew, was very close to, and she asked, well, what are some things that you knew? Did this person experience X, Y, and Z? Because I'm beginning to think that some of the things I'm experiencing are tied to this family member of ours. And it was just interesting our having that discussion, to have someone so young kind of make that connection. So I think it's definitely a topic that we're hearing more and more about. You know, it's interesting. Just, was it about a week ago, I read about a young woman who had studied her ancestry. And I, in this case, it isn't, going by your definition, Sooyong, it isn't someone these aren't people she knew. But I'm interested in hearing your take on this. She is like so many, you know, African Americans. You know, there's both sides of the spectrum, where there's African ancestry, but there's also European ancestry. And so she studied that, and she found, interestingly enough, along her lineage, she found those ancestors who were slave owners, and she also found that side who were the slaves, and again, her ancestors were the slaves of the slave owners. And I mean, is there any possibility that she could be carrying, even though she didn't know these people, because it's some generations back, you spoke about trauma. Is there any chance that she might be embodying or carrying some of the trauma from that lineage? or, or might there be a trigger just from learning that information about her history? What are your thoughts?
Yes, I definitely believe that you can inherit that trauma,
Mhm.
and there have been books written about this particular phenomenon. For instance, they've done research into Holocaust survivors and how their grandchildren have inherited some of the trauma that was experienced by the people who experienced the Holocaust. So definitely slavery would be a huge, huge trauma that could be passed down. And until we actually take a look at it, examine it, and heal it, and release it, then it could really very well stay in your system.
So does everyone have some form? I mean, we all have ancestors.
Yes.
Does everyone have some form of ancestral trauma, or does that just pertain to certain individuals? How does that work? What are
I
your
believe
thoughts?
that everybody has it, just because when you look at history, just think of all the things that happened. I mean, look at the wars, the horrible things that happened, slavery, the way that people treated each other, murdered each other, killed each other, and all that kind of stuff was very, very traumatic. And for instance, I mean, the way women were treated also before the modern age. So yeah, I believe that everybody is subject to something that's inherited trauma.
So what are some of the symptoms? I mean, if you can recall, for example, the case of the Holocaust, descendants of the Holocaust survivors, what are some symptoms that we might experience if we have ancestral trauma? What are some of the
Sometimes it
symptoms?
can be I'm sorry, sometimes it can be an unexplained physical pain of some kind that is just unexplained and it just doesn't go away. And sometimes it's just straight out anxiety and depression, that kind of thing, even though there's really no reason for this person to experience that because their lives are going really well, but all of a sudden they're very anxious and depressed and nobody can figure out why. And then people have gone and studied their ancestry and figured out that, oh yeah, my grandmother, grandfather, great-grandfather experienced this when they were around my age, around, say you were 25 when and it happened. Yeah, they experienced that around that same age. And then you can say, okay, well, this is not all about me. This is something that happened and I don't have to give it to my children. I don't have to, it can stop right here. I can heal this. I can process this trauma. And that's the beauty of it. Once you process it and you can heal it and release it, then you don't have to give it to your children or your grandchildren.
That's wonderful. It's you spoke of various symptoms. I've heard of people having aches and pains and certain things. They've gone to the doctors, they've gone and they have examined the person head to toe, inside and out,
Mm.
and not able to detect what's going on. So in a lot of those cases, it very well might be ancestral trauma. How does that work? Does that get kind of encoded in our DNA? Is that how exactly does that manifest through us? How does that work exactly?
Yes, I believe that your DNA changes when you go through trauma. And then once it changes, then it can really be passed down. And it happens also with women who are pregnant and then they have some kind of trauma and then sometimes, or they're depressed when they're pregnant or something like that. And sometimes their children can pick that up as well because they're extremely sensitive when they're in the womb.
It's so funny you should say that. My mom used to say that she made sure that when she was pregnant with me, that she watched comedies a lot, and that she would just make sure that she was, you know, laughing and that she was happy and so on. I think she definitely believed that, you know, the child could feel the emotions and such from the parent, you know, while the child is in utero. So that's really, really interesting. So, you know, many people say, you know, we have to understand where we came from to truly understand ourselves. And when we look at ancestral healing, it seems that that's the case on a physical and emotional level, that understanding our ancestors and understanding what they might have experienced, you know, we better understand ourselves. Explain a little bit more about that.
Yes, I believe that it's really important to know where we came from. And for instance, I mean, most people know who our parents are. Some people who are adopted may have some trouble finding that out. But the search, I mean, I've seen a lot of adoption stories where they really search for their birth parents. And very often, I mean, for instance, a lot of Korean children were adopted into the United States, and they go back to Korea to try to find the birth parents, and most of them actually don't find them. Some of them do, and when they do, they feel like they've come home. They feel like they've found the person who is part of their history, because it's really important to look at your history to find out more about yourself, what your tendencies are, why you do certain things a certain way. It's something that maybe your grandmother did, or maybe she cooked something that you also cook, and maybe they like certain foods that you like, and all that kind of stuff. But when you find that, it's, for me, it's like a homecoming. And whenever I watch these programs where actually people do find their birth parents, I mean, it's just so emotional. I mean, yeah, I do the ugly cry, you know. I'm just like, oh my God, this is just so amazing. And there was this story about this, actually this girl from China, and her parents, actually her father wrote a note in her case saying that I will go to this bridge every year at a certain time, because I really did not want to give you up, because in those days China had that one-child policy. So anyway, they had to give her up. And so finally, they got the note translated when she was much older. I think she was in her 20s. And she went. And apparently her father had come to that bridge every single year for years to see if he could meet her. And I think they had a BBC program where they actually filmed the whole reunion. And, you know, you're going to have that ugly cry, you know, when that happens, because it's just so fulfilling and so emotional. But you know what your history is, you know who your parents are. And then through that, then you know who your grandparents are, and back and forth, you know, all the way back, if you can trace yourself that far. So it is, I think it is a very human urge to find where we come from.
Yes, most definitely. It's interesting, Sooyong, you mentioned adoption, and I believe a part of the process for adoptive parents is that there needs to be some sort of, or ideally, some sort of connection with the birth family. And I think it's for that very reason that you're talking about, to understand where you come from, to be able to see yourself in your biological family, and to have that sense of connection, and to develop that sense of understanding about yourself through that connection. And so I believe that is a part of the process nowadays for the adoptive parents to have that kind of connection, and to even keep a scrapbook of some sort,
Right.
with pictures of the birth parents and so on and so forth. I think that's so special. When I look at some of these celebrity parents like Angelina Jolie,
Mm-hmm.
who's adopted children from various countries, and Madonna, I see that they make sure that that connection with the birth country, takes place. And I think that's so, so very important. You would talk, Soo Young, about the healing of oneself allows us to heal some of the trauma in our ancestors. And I think that might be a little confusing for some of us. Like, how can we heal those who have already transitioned? They've already crossed over. They're not
Mm-hmm.
physically living here with us. And so we do our own healing and in turn heal our ancestors. Explain how that works.
That is a metaphysical type of phenomenon.
Mhm.
So depending on your belief system, we are kind of along a continuum, and it's kind of like a string that connects us to our ancestors and our descendants. And anytime that we say, for instance, we pluck the string or we do something, then it will affect our ancestors and our descendants as well. So the more healing we do, then they will also benefit. And also remember that everything is energy. So once our energy is different, then they will pick up on that as well, on the spirit side. So again, this is very metaphysical, and some people may say, well, that's ridiculous, but that's just a metaphysical point of view.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. So, parents, when they're thinking about family planning, they're thinking about starting their families. Most people think about, do I have the financial aptitude to take care of the child? Or even, do I, am I emotionally sound to be able to provide guidance to my child to be? It sounds like with the concept of ancestral healing, there's some other things that potential parents might take into account too. Like, maybe I should do some of this work before I bring new life
Mm-hmm.
into this universe, because I don't want to pass on, you know, ancestral traumas that potentially are lurking. What are is that something? Have you heard of parents kind of making those types of considerations now and doing that kind of work up front before they decide to have children?
I mean, I haven't really heard of anybody doing that, but basically, if you do as much work as you can before you have children, then you know that you are in a much better position. And the more information you have about your ancestors, the more you can help your children. For instance, if there's certain ages where the certain experiences were happened in the past, then if your child starts to act out at that age or something for no reason, no good reason, then you might have some additional information. So it's a very good informational tool. But just like healers, I mean, if you can do as much healing as possible, then you're a much more clear vessel to help other people. And I think nowadays some parents are doing a lot of healing, and they're on the path, the spiritual path and all that kind of stuff. So I think, for instance, when you think back 1 or 2 generations even, parents were not as conscious as they are nowadays. I mean, some of the parents nowadays, I think, are really doing an excellent job because they're just great parents. I mean, they listen to their kids, they give them choices, they don't yell and scream, which was a very common thing, at least 1 or 2 generations ago. Parents just said, okay, just because I said so, you have to do this.
Yeah, yeah,
Why? I'm not going to give you a reason. I mean,
right.
I'm
Just
your
do as I
mom.
say.
And then, of course, the beating, and I know. I mean, I know a lot of people who actually had to go pick out their stick from the tree to get spanked with.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, that was very common. But nowadays, really, I mean, people are much more conscious, and
Yeah.
they're doing more conscious parenting, I believe.
I believe too, and I hear more and more parents talking about being facilitators, and not so much controlling the lives of the child, but just kind of
Right.
facilitating the growth and development of the
Mhm.
child. And I think that's a really, really healthy approach. So, and how does ancestral healing work? Is it something that we can do on our own, and we're just given the tools and then we can put the tools to work and do that ourselves? Or do we need to have kind of third party assistance and go to a professional to help with this healing? How does ancestral healing work exactly?
You can certainly do a lot of healing yourself. You can just the act of doing research, just getting information about your ancestors is healing. Just that act. Looking at pictures, if you have some old pictures of your ancestors, I mean, that's really great. I mean, my family doesn't have a lot of pictures because my parents both grew up in North Korea, so when they left, they weren't able to bring much. But if you have pictures, if I mean, there are these really popular shows now. There's that show on PBS about finding your
Oh,
roots.
yes. I love that.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, it's just, isn't it amazing? Isn't it
It is.
amazing and then to find out that you're related to whoever, so,
Yeah. Yes.
yeah,
You know,
so,
mhm.
yeah, go ahead.
No, no, I was just thinking, I know that show that you're talking about, with Henry Louis Gates, I believe, as host. My husband Art and I watched that quite a
Mhm.
lot. And I would say about 2011, my husband and I were very, very interested in our ancestry.
Mhm.
And we did the ancestry.com test to find out, where we come from. And it was just very interesting. I mean, we had some ideas. Certainly there would be West Africa and other places, but there were just some really interesting finds, like, wow, I have a part of this and a part of that.
Mhm.
And, all of these different elements that are part of me that I never knew. So, it's just so interesting, and we've made such beautiful discoveries from that. So I highly encourage. In fact, one soon after that, for Christmas, we got Ancestry.com kits for family members. We were just like, this is amazing. And but yeah, it's so important, and we've been able to talk to other family members about things that we've learned about ourselves. There's so much information out there. I mean, on down to historic records. Part of my family is from Barbados on my mom's side, and just records from, seeing, my great grandparents and my grandparents, migrate over and coming to Ellis Island, and the actual paperwork. And
Mhm.
it's just amazing the historical
Yeah.
documents that are out there. I mean,
Mhm.
but you're right. It's just something about seeing that, learning about that puts you so much more in touch with yourself. You just look at yourself from a totally different perspective. And you're right, there's healing just in the research of
Right.
that. It's just something that was very transformative about that for me and for Art.
Mhm.
that has been really, really beautiful. But in addition to doing the research, what are some other things that is a part of the ancestral healing process? Are our ancestors actually involved in that process? Um, tell us more.
Yes, one of the things you can do is to connect with specific ancestors. And you would go into meditation and then you would ask whoever it is that you want to connect with, or if you don't know, then whoever wants to connect with you to come to you and to communicate with you somehow.
Mhm.
And I definitely have ancestors who are helping me with my healing work. I mean, I call them part of my team. And there's certain, for instance, my maternal grandfather, I feel him around a lot because, I mean, he's the kind of person who liked to do a lot of, he was very adventurous. He was an independence fighter for Korea back when Japan was occupying Korea. And he just really likes to do different things, and whenever I do something fun, I can feel him around him say, "Oh, this is so great! I'm experiencing this with you," or something like that, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, going sailing or something, or bike riding, or yeah, just kind of having fun somehow.
Yeah.
So they are definitely, I mean, they want to help you. They're around. And again, this depends on your belief system, but metaphysically, the spirit world is accessible and the veil is getting thinner by the day. So even if you never felt anything before, you might say, okay, Grandma, would you please communicate with me? And again, when you go into meditation and you open to that energy, then you can very well get in touch and connect with your ancestors.
Yes. You know, it's interesting just facing just day-to-day things. More and more, I've been calling on my
Mm.
ancestors. And because I do believe that they surround us, I do believe that energy is eternal. I
Mm-hmm.
believe that their energy lives on. And I've called on them quite a lot recently. I've been doing that more and more.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting. You're right. You do feel the energy, particularly, you know, with those you knew and you had that connection with,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like my grandmothers on both sides. I was very, very close to my grandmothers. And they had they're very strong women. They were very strong personalities. And they, you know, so much of who I am is a result of who they were,
Right.
you know, when they were here and what they shared with me. And and so yeah, I call on them. I call on them and others for support at various times. And I do feel their energy. I do feel you know, lifted and supported. Is it something that you find, Sooyong, that in order to get their support or feel their support that you have to ask? Or do you feel that it's just automatic, that they are there guiding and supporting, or or do we have to ask? Do they need our permission to support us?
Well, one thing to note is that they're on the other side, they're not subject to space or time. So you might think, oh, maybe they're doing something else. Maybe I'm disturbing them or something, you know, maybe they're in a concert or something. But that's not true because again, they can be in many different places at once. I mean, they could be here, they could be over in Siberia or whatever. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. And they're around, but again, they're not going to interfere with you if you don't want it. So you do have to be open to it. You have to be open to their help. And again, I mean, you've been calling out to them, so that's definitely something, a message that they'll feel like okay, I can help Stephanie out here because she has asked for help. Sometimes they will help with something, but I think you do have to be open, at least open to it. You may not say, oh, please help me, Grandma, but okay, I'm open to help from others or my grandparents or something like that.
So what about dreams? I know for me, I have quite a number of dreams from my
Yeah.
ancestors. My grandmothers in particular, and my mother, who transitioned 5 years ago. Lots of dreams, and my mother used to speak of having dreams of her mom, my grandmother.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Do you feel that that some form of healing takes place from our ancestors through our dreams? What do you think?
Yes, for sure. The dreams are one way of communicating, and it's, in my family at least, it's an acceptable way of explaining something that's metaphysical. So if I say, oh, I felt my grandfather around me, people might say, oh, that's weird. But if I say I had a dream about my grandfather, then everybody would say, oh, that's really cool. So that's
Yes.
one way to explain it. And people in my family have had prophetic dreams and that kind of thing. So it's acceptable. So it depends on what's going on in your family, but definitely that's one way. That's really a really big way for ancestors to communicate with you. There are, of course, other ways like playing around with electricity and all that kind of stuff, and the fan starts going, And actually today, I have been having some issues with my phone, and this morning my phone was on the fritz again, and I kind of felt like my father, grandparents were just kind of laughing. They're playing a trick on me.
Yeah, the electrical devices, I can attest to that as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting how that works. But
Apparently,
yeah,
that's an easy way. That's an easy way for them to communicate, because electricity is something that they can kind of control a little bit better than other things.
Yeah, and I see Art is on. Art, you know what I'm talking about, and certain things, and I'm glad I have him as a witness because you're right. If you told some people certain things, they'd be like, okay, Stephanie, we'll need to see about you. But yeah, Art has witnessed those things too. So it's like, wow, did you see that? But yeah, I find it, very comforting when those things happen. It's nothing that's too far out or scary or anything of that sort. Very, very loving energy. So you had mentioned meditation as a technique that we can employ for ancestral healing. Is there anything that we do? Yes, he's attesting to it. Yes, I have. Is there anything, that we should do that's kind of different from just your normal meditation? Is there a particular type of meditation we should engage in when trying to invoke ancestral healing?
Yes, because we are actually invoking someone, let's say your grandmother, and we are asking her to come and be with us and to communicate with us. So it is a very specific type of meditation, and it's very similar to kind of getting in touch with your inner wisdom as well, because you specifically ask your inner wisdom to come to you, and so you ask your ancestor to come to you. And if you know who it is, that's good. You don't have to know who it is. It could be somebody who wants to, somebody that you have a connection with that you didn't even know about. Somebody who's say a great-great-grandfather, a great-great-grandmother that you have very little information about, but maybe you have a lot in common, or you have a special connection somehow, and they want to come through to help you in your life.
And should we be very specific, like, hey, I have this pain over my right side, or should we just kind of leave it open-ended and just ask for just general healing? What do you suggest?
I would ask for guidance. I would ask if they have any suggestions for the pain, or if there's something that they would recommend.
Would you mind giving us a personal account of how you have used, ancestral healing techniques on your healing journey? Just an example.
Yeah, well, in my chapter, actually, I had sent you a copy of the chapter because I finished it, and there are patternings that happen throughout your ancestry. And for instance, at the age of 13, my grandfather had to leave school and get married because his father died, and to take over the farm. And when I was 13, my father passed away. So I felt that I had a special connection with him. When I found out about that, I didn't really know exactly when his father passed away, but when I heard that he was 13, I was like, wow, something really traumatic happened to both of us. So I have a special connection with him, and maybe that's why I feel closer to him, because that's one of the similarities that we have. So I think the more research I do and the more I find out about my ancestors, I feel more of a connection. And then a lot of the ancestors actually traveled far away. I had mentioned the Princess Suritnatna, who had come from either India or Thailand to Korea to marry a Korean king. And she was 16, something like that. And then we have a lot of travel. We moved to Malaysia from South Korea when I was 7, and then we moved to the United States when I was 12. And a lot of journeys. And I think a lot of people will find that, especially immigrants, whether you came here by choice or by force.
Yes, it sounds to me, Sooyong, that, just in listening to you, that it's the healing doesn't only come from shared trauma, but also from strengths and positive attributes. You spoke about one of your ancestors who was, very strong and, freedom fighter and so on, and just kind of feeling the energy of that. So it can kind of happen both ways. It's just kind of understanding that, this may be something that was traumatic that's shared, but it could also be the reverse of that I can get healing from the strengths and such from my ancestors. Is that the case?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the bravery of, for instance, this young woman who she left her country, and probably, and she never, I'm pretty sure she never went back, because this was like in the first 1100 or so. I can't remember the exact date, but this was hundreds of years ago. And at that time, you went to another country far away, and that was it. You never saw your family again. You never saw your country again. So just that act of bravery is something that I can use in my life when I face something that is scary and difficult and that I've never done before. I feel like I'm jumping off of a cliff and I don't know what is going to happen.
Yes. Yes. Well, Sooyong, final thoughts on this, because we don't want to give away too much. We want to save a little bit for people to read the book when it comes out. So we'll wrap up with your final thoughts that you'd like to share with us on ancestral healing.
I do feel that it's a very relevant topic at this time. A lot of people are doing research, as I mentioned before, and they have found that ancestors are very important in our healing, in our development. And for us to do the research, I mean, I found it very interesting. I mean, I found it a lot of fun to do all the research. And every time I found something, I was like, wow, this is so great. This is, it gives you chills and it gives you whatever, goosebumps. And I just found it really fascinating. And to find people who are like me, especially as you know, I pretty much everywhere I go, I'm like the only Korean American woman, almost everywhere I go. So it really gives me a sense of connection and belonging, and really the connection with my ancestors is really important in my healing process.
Well, Sooyong, thank you so very much. You're right. This is a fascinating topic, and I encourage everyone out there, take Sooyong up on the techniques that she has talked about, meditation being the primary tool, and asking your ancestors, inviting them into your healing process as you move along each day on your healing journey. This is so great for you to share with us, Sooyong, information from your upcoming book, Immigrant Consciousness Healing for Beginners. You and I will continue to provide information from each of your book's chapters. So far, we have covered chapters 1 and 2. We are going to come up on chapter 3, which is on fun healing. And we are going to continue to provide video shorts on each of the chapters that will come out on Talk About It Instagram, as well as the Talk About It YouTube channel, as well as Sooyong's website, sooyongkim.com. Please be on the lookout. The third video on fun healing, it will come out probably in a couple of weeks, right, Sooyong? So
yes.
Look out for video 3 on fun healing, which is the topic of chapter 3 in Sooyong's upcoming book, Immigrant Consciousness Healing for Beginners. And we will continue to do these lives because the shorts are just like 1 minute long. It gives you a nice snippet with good information that you could it's just like a little nibble of information, a nice bite of information to really give you a nice booster shot as you go about your day to day. But then we're going to come here each month and do a deeper dive in these lives on each of the chapters. So
I do want to mention something that I forgot to mention is that when the healing process, I also talk about certain acupuncture points that you can work on in each chapter that you can work on in your meditation to provide more healing.
Okay, so there's acupuncture that can accompany the process as you're meditating and doing the ancestral healing. That's interesting. Can you talk to I can't let you off the hook, so you got to tell us a little bit more about how acupuncture works. It taps into various energy centers in the body, right?
Yes, the acupuncture points are certain points along the meridians of the body. And for instance, with ancestral healing, I picked a point that was a kidney point because kidney energy is ancestral energy. And kidney 1 is a very key point. And it's called Gushing Spring. As you can imagine, it's a powerful point.
Mhm. That sounds like it. Gushing Spring, kidney
Mhm.
area. Wow, that's fascinating, and thank you so much for the advanced copy of the chapter. Yes,
Sure.
I read it, but you're gonna have to wait until the book comes out for you to read the various chapters. Ancestral healing is just really, really fascinating. Thank you, Talk About It family, for tuning in to tonight's Talk About It Live with Sooyong Kim, talking about her chapter on ancestral healing from her upcoming book, Immigrant Consciousness Healing for Beginners. And Sooyong, thank you so very much for joining me today.
Thank
Talk
you so
About It,
much.
family. We'll see you again. Stay tuned.
All right.
Bye bye.
Bye.